Welcome back on the AM show. It does feel good to be back. Let's now delve into the papers, and we're joined by Bobby Banson, a lawyer. He'll be joining us shortly as we get into the newspapers. But a lot to talk about this morning. We have quite a stack of papers, unlike we saw during the Christmas period. Now the papers are back in full swing. We'll be delving into them, and don't you forget this morning we'll host former General Secretary of the MPP, Nana Hininto, who also speaks. He is in the Alan Chemating camp. The other day you must have heard Alan Chemating talk about GTP and NATO and all of that. What does he mean? What is his agenda for Ghana? And can he execute? Can his team break the eight should they get the nod? We'll be delving into all of those matters. But let's start with the newspapers this morning. The Daily Graphic: who wins NPP flag bearership? 9 stalwarts eye slot. That story is there. President in Abu Dhabi for Energy Summit, and GRA exceeds revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. There's also scrap levies on fuel to reduce prices further. And of course, that is something that most of us look forward to. Fuel prices are still expensive. We're grateful that they've taken a bit of a tumble, but if you look at previous prices compared to the current ones, we still could do a whole lot more. But let's start with that big story, the banner headline in the Daily Graphic newspaper. Who wins NPP flag bearership? What do you think? If you're on our live stream, share your thoughts with us. With about 2 years to the December 2024 general election, 9 stalwarts of the New Patriotic Party are eyeing the flag bearership of the party. Already, 2 of them have resigned from their cabinet positions to prepare and win the hearts and minds of party delegates. I'm sure you know them. They are the Minister of Trade and Industry, Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen, and the Minister of Food and Agriculture, Dr. Owusu Afriyie-Akoto. The 7 other contenders, all leading members of the MPP, are the Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, a former Minister of Energy, Boakye Agyarko, the Member of Parliament for Asin Central, Kennedy Ohene-Agyapong, and a former presidential spokesperson and General Secretary of the party, Kwabena Ejapon. The rest are former Attorney General and Minister of Justice Joe Gate, who is also the Member of Parliament for Esikado Ketang, a former MP for Mampong Francis Adainimo, and a former Minister of State, Dr. Kofi Knedu Apreku, who is also a former Member of Parliament for Ofinso North. The MPP is, however, yet to open nominations, but these are the gentlemen that we've seen showing some signs, some semblance of wanting to take on the party, lead the party to break the 8 as they have purported over time. It is interesting because the last time my colleague Bertis Abubedu had an interaction with Dr. Nyaho Tamaklo, a founder of the party, he took some pot shots at Kennedy Ejapong, talking about when he had come into the party and how much he had done. But in recent times, Kennedy Ohene-Agyapong, the Member of Parliament for Asin Central, also went back talking about even sometime in the 90s, early 90s, and a loan that he had to take and for the party, on behalf of the party, which it had taken him about 8 years to pay, and other things. Well, in the end, it's the party, the delegates. And that is why Sir John said, fear delegates. The way it is now, take your mind back to the early 2000s when some of these congresses or conferences were held, and how people were shocked, if you remember at the time, Aliyu Muhammad, then vice president, and what happened to him. You would know that delegates can't be relied on. It happened again, similar incident, when Job Wedu lost the seat to JFK, Justin Frimpong Kodia, as the general secretary or scribe of the MPP. So how will it pan out when it comes to these elections? Who will carry the day? The other dimension to it has to do with, and some party people are not in agreement with this, former President John Agyekum Kufuor says, look, this suggestion about let's pair Alan Chemating and Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia together and leave the rest is not in the right direction. Why? He says, let democracy have its way. In other words, let them go. Whoever wins, wins. And those are the democratic tenets that the party must observe. But after that, will they weigh that option? Consider, for example, if, and this is just being hypothetical, I don't lean anywhere, if Alan Chemating becomes the flag bearer, for example, would the current vice president, if he came in second, for example, would he want to take the vice presidential slot? Would Alan even be willing to do that? Would he be able to work with the vice president? They are in the same party, but these are questions that crop up. Let's reverse it. Should the vice president get the slot for his party? Would Alan be willing, after his trajectory of contending for the ultimate spot in the party, would he now be willing to take a second place or vice presidential slot to the vice president? All of those dynamics play. And who knows? We're even talking about these two gentlemen, but who knows? All the others that we've listed here could pull a surprise, could pull a rabbit out of the hat. Then what happens? And how will this play out for the NPP in terms of breaking the eight? All of these are questions, in some ways convoluted, that we can ponder, but we'll wait for when this happens and we'll see how things go. So those are some of the bits there. Just to give you a bit of an idea, according to Article 13(1) of the NPP Constitution, the election for the party's presidential candidates shall be held not later than 24 months from the date of the national elections. The date and venue for the election shall be decided by the National Council, provided, however, that the National Council may, on appropriate occasions, vary the day. And just to serve as a bit of a reminder as well, Mr. Chirmanting served under former President Kufuor between 2003 and 2007, before his reappointment by President Akufo-Addo in 2017 till his resignation early this year. This will also be the fourth time Mr. Chirmanting is contesting the NPP flag bearership. The first was in 2007, the second in 2010, and the third in 2014. 2007, 2010, 2014. And now, very likely, at least from what we've seen so far, and his resignation and everything else, 2023, if you like, 2023, thereabouts. So we'll see how that pans out. Let's also take a look at the president's being in Dubai, in fact, in Abu Dhabi for that energy summit. There's been a lot of talk about that. So let's get to it. President Akufo-Addo is leading a delegation from Ghana to attend the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week in the United Arab Emirates. The ADSW is a global initiative championed by the United Arab Emirates and its clean energy powerhouse, Masdar, to accelerate sustainable development and advance economic, social, and environmental progress. The president is accompanied by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shelley Ayoko Botry, the Minister of Energy, Dr. Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, the Minister of Lands and Natural Resources, Samuel Abu-Jinapo. We've heard him in the news recently. He also is now acting as Trades and Industry Minister. The Minister of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Kweku Efriye, officials from the presidency, the Foreign Ministry, as well as energy agencies. Now, the ADSW, established in 2008, brings together heads of state, policymakers, industry leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, and youth, all of whom have a stake in the future of our planet. Why? To discuss and engage on bold climate and innovations that will ensure a more sustainable world for future generations. The 15th edition of the annual events will be held under the patronage of the UAE President, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who has championed sustainability as a key pillar of the UAE's economic and social progress and prosperity. Just speaking of the United Arab Emirates, though, brings to mind Saudi Arabia. Yes, they are out there for a lot of the wrong reasons. Women's rights and sometimes whitewashing. You remember that incident to do with golf and how they were trying to get some of the top players around the world to come there, fizzled out. Now they have the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Al Nassr, all of that to give the country a certain good image. But I saw something recently that, just made me think. A lot of their desert, just as Dubai has done in the United Arab Emirates, they also have this futuristic plan. Hundreds of billions of dollars to transform their country, portions of their country, into something else, something technologically advanced and all of that. And when I saw that, I again asked myself, we're so far behind some parts of the world, most of the world, in fact. The economic north is leagues, light years ahead of us. When are we going to catch up? What are we going to do And as we continue to mark time, somewhere in Spain, they are producing about 100 tons of cocoa. Maybe not much, 80 tons thereabouts. The Chinese tried doing it. What does that point out to us? It means all of these countries are trying to wean themselves of their dependence on us when it comes to agricultural products. And yet we can't even get agriculture right. Interesting take sometimes. I just sometimes when I look at Ghana and think about us and think about our leaders and everything, I just wonder, because these leaders we have are Oxbridge students, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all of those. The agric minister, for example, schooled at Cambridge. Agric economics, how is that told on our economy? These are all things we can digest. But let's look at the story as well. Very interesting one. It's by Kester Abroam Kranche, who says, scrap levies on fuel to reduce prices further. And I agree with him. Now, existing taxes and levies imposed on petroleum products need to be rationalized to beat down the prices of petroleum products at the pump, two energy experts have said. An associate lecturer at the University of Aberdeen in the United Kingdom, Dr. Theophilus Echampong, and the executive secretary of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers, COPEC, Duncan Amwa, believe that while some of the levies have not been fully used for their intended purposes, others have outlived their purpose but continue to contribute to the price buildup on fuel sold to consumers. Dr. Champon said the price stabilization and recovery levy, for instance, had not been fully used for its intended purpose, although it continued to contribute to the price buildup on fuel, which is true. So when we're looking for those sums of money that we had put down to cushion us in instances when fuel prices shoot up, among others, the money had been expended elsewhere and we were left with empty hands, which is why, part of why, prices kept soaring to the point where it simply became unbearable. If you've forgotten, diesel hit 24 cedis, 23 cedis and 99 pesos. Petrol hit around 21 cedis. And those were some very tricky times. So we thank God that we're not in that league anymore. But even where we find ourselves currently, it's still quite a draw on our pockets. And a lot more must be done. And futuristically, we must think about some of these situations, what we use the ESLA and others for, so that we'll not be caught pants down with our hands in the cookie jar when things, we are caught up that proverbial creek without a paddle. We're joined by Bobby Benson, a lawyer and a man who freely speaks his mind. Bobby, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Good to have you, and our apologies for dragging you out of bed this early.
for God and country.
Great. So already I've taken a look at who wins the MPP flag bearership. There are 9 stalwarts. We are looking at big wigs in the party. And of course, you cannot overlook those who have resigned. Alan Chamating, former Trades and Industry Minister. And this would be his second stint from the Kufuor era. And now, then, Agric Minister Dr. Efriye Akoto. They have resigned. We have the likes of the Vice President. We have Boakye Jakon, former Energy Minister, a number of members of Parliament in there. What do you make about the MPP? When you look at the MPP now and how things are going, I'm sure you heard Alan the last time. Efriye Akoto says he will also be speaking. What do you make of developments as far as the flag bearership of the party is concerned?
Well, I think that it was to be expected. The MPP, we all know that when there is an opportunity for the presidential elections or flag bearership race, they have a lot of their personal or big words vying for the position. And so it was to be expected. I just hope that unlike what happened in the 2007 race, we would have people not complaining too much about the procedure or the election, the campaigning process, and they will come out stronger than divided, because a strong MPP party is good for Ghana's democracy.
Let's also talk about scrapping levies on fuel to reduce prices further. An academic together with the leader of the executive secretary of COPEC, Duncan Amwa, both of them are saying, look, the ESLA, for example, is not being used for its intended purposes. Let's do that, and let's also take off payments when they are not used for that. There are also other price build-ups. I don't know the last time you tried buying anything. The COVID-19 levy is still featuring in there. And some of us ask ourselves, why are we still being taxed for this? Are you in agreement with them? Because they keep increasing the prices of fuel. And I say, Bobby, that while prices have taken a tumble and we're grateful, like Oliver Twist, we want more. We can always do better. Your take?
Well, I particularly want to start with the COVID levy. It's interesting. I think that it's only in Ghana that we are still paying for the COVID levy. Obviously, then we ask yourself, if a tax is introduced for a particular purpose and that purpose has been extinguished or is no longer relevant, is it lawful to continue to ask the people to pay those taxes? And so it's interesting to see, except that, we must also admit that we are in a country where the government itself says that there is no money to even pay bondholders and things like that. And so you cannot take away the fact that the government, whether legal or illegal, would want to exhaust any avenue possible to be able to raise funds. So if the civil societies, when they introduce some of these levies, a lot of the civil society sometimes supports because of the purpose. They are saying these funds are going for this purpose. But if the purposes are no longer relevant or they are no longer, like we said, they've been exhausted, then it stands to reason why those should be scrapped. Because at the end of the day, the government is there to make the lives of the citizens comfortable by whatever legal means that they can. So if in the midst of all these economic hardships that the government itself has acknowledged, if there are means that they can reduce these hardships on the consumer or on the citizenry by removing these taxes that they introduce for specific purpose, I believe it's a call in the right direction.
What do you make, though? This just came to mind since we're talking about the flag bearers and all of that. So what happened with Alan Chemating, his resignation, and then we saw in a statement by the Jubilee House that Ken Ofori-Atta, the finance minister, was taking over. And then all of a sudden, a short while later, a few days later, we saw that it was Samuel Abu Jinapor taking over without any correction, so to speak, of the statement from the presidency. With legal documents, of course, if something comes subsequently and it does not make any reference but states something else, I guess in some cases it is assumed that the second one takes precedence over the first. But legally speaking, what should be done in such instances? I'm just curious.
Well, the law allows the president to appoint people in caretaker positions. It will not be the first time that in such circumstances we've had the president appoint other persons to hold that fort until the president makes a substantive appointment that will now go through the constitutional procedures, appearing before Parliament, as it were, and getting your nomination approved. And so if the president, I want to think that the backlash to the appointment of Ken Ofori-Atta as the stand-up minister, in the light of all the struggles he himself has had as a finance minister, may be what may have influenced the president's decision to withdraw should I say his nomination or his appointment, for lack of a better word, as a stopgap measure. And so if in his own wisdom he thinks that Mr. Samuel Abu Jinapor is better placed to discharge that responsibility in the short term, we would want to see for what interests me most is who he would nominate in the long term. I don't think that there's any legal question as to whether the president could now change who the stopgap minister would be. Like I said, it's not a substantive position that is required to go through the provisions of the 1992 Constitution, because I don't think that there would be any additional emoluments for playing that role or additional benefits for playing that role. I believe that it will only be administrative in the sense that the directors are there, as it were, to do the real work. And so we would want to see how soon the president will be prepared to nominate a substantive person for that position.
Well, let's see how long that would take. And we know that for the Agric Ministry, the Fisheries Minister has also been asked to stand in, Mavis Hawa Kumsin. Let's look at the story. GRA exceeds revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. That story is there. And on the back page, I don't know how much of football you follow, Bobby, but Black Galaxies lose 1-2 to Madagascar. If you look at the build-up to this match, well, I think was it Uganda or Angola they played the last match against? It did not end because the other team had scored one, and then we got a penalty, and then the other team walked off the pitch. So it was inconclusive. But they beat Al Ahly. They beat, I think, the Egyptian side. They beat other sides. It looked very good. But then they get to the tournament proper, and Morocco had exited because they wanted a direct flight to Algeria, and that did not happen. So each team started with 3 points, and now they've lost their first match, which means they have a mountain to climb in that second match. What do you have any expectations at all?
I watched the match, Ben.
Right.
And for the first half, it was really funny because our players kept slipping on the pitch. The one I watched, the commentators were laughing at us, saying that we did not have the proper boots to play on such surfaces. And I felt, it was an indictment on our football administrators that you go to the pitch before the match to train, and then you see that it's just been watered, and you still go with boots that will cause your players to fall, to slip. You notice that the 2 goals we conceded were all mistakes from the back. And so the first goal, the defender slipped and it allowed the opponent to win the ball. The second goal, it was a back pass that went bad, So maybe the technical handlers can say that, well, it was the bad pitch. But the administrators, it was the bad pitch. But the administrators should be made accountable. I am beginning to doubt if there is any, or there would be any hope from this. I spoke to some of the persons before the tournament, and Ghana was tipped as a country that would at least reach the finals. And with the performances I saw yesterday, especially in the first half, the second half, they improved a bit, to be frank. We would see what the second game would come out. It will not be the first time that a team has lost the first game and gone on to perform very well.
Right.
I think in Angola as well, 2010 or so, there was a similar situation where the Togolese national team withdrew from the tournament under very different circumstances. I believe we lost our first match, and then we went on
to the finals, I think.
Yes, and so that is my only prayer, that the technical handlers and the administrators will put their house in order so that this will not be another shambolic performance at a tournament. Ever since Mr. Ketokreku took over the affairs of the administration of Ghana football, we've not done well in major tournaments, and I want to think that this should be an exception. But if we do not, then we would always come back to the drawing table and start the blame game, and then we will see how far this will go.
Let's look at other stories quickly from the Ghanaian Times newspaper. President attends Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week initiative in the UAE. We've already taken a look at that. GRA bagged 75.5 billion in 2022, and that is cedis. Beats revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. GES rescinds decision on punishment of 8 Chiana SHS students and 70,000 students to benefit from 2022-2023 loan scheme. Let's start with a bit about those 8 students, the Chiana students. We all saw the videos. They were in poor taste, bad taste, but legally speaking, yes, and some of them are over 18. I hear practically all of them. Do we indict people for insulting public figures? I think sometime last year, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, got a slap from somebody. Of course, that is assault. Then that became physical. But this whole bit about the president coming in to sort of say, oh, let's not punish them, after civil society, after a lot of people, prominent people, after Child Rights International had stepped in. What is the stance? I've heard people go back to the early 2000s and other incidents of insulting where the law simply did not have anything to say against that. What does the law say, Bobby?
Well, I have read or followed that particular story, and there's no doubt that there's no law that makes insulting somebody who is a president or a public official an offense. I mean, you could have our laws are such generic that unless you think that you have been defamed, it's not even an offense. It's a civil matter that you can take it on. Remember, the libel law has been repealed from our books. I do not think that they would have any basis to do that. But Ben, if we
And this
look
was
at
as far back as, if I'm not mistaken, around 2001, right? The criminal libel law.
Well, yes, was repealed. But if we look at the larger picture, you see, we and this is where, for me, I always come back to whether it's the National Communications Authority or whatever that we have. These people we are calling students, or if we want to extend the discussion to the youth, which I believe you and I will not be accepted. What are we exposed to these days? Where you would have people in the name of journalism sit on media platforms and use words that we cannot repeat on platforms like yours in describing or criticizing public officials, some as high as the president. And the National Media Commission and the National Communications Authority, I'm mentioning the NTA because they are responsible for issuing the frequencies that these media houses operate upon or operate on, and they don't do anything. And these insults go viral. And so if you're a student or you're a youth and you don't have the benefit of a superior elderly wisdom, and you see somebody that is presented as a journalist or as a freedom fighter, for lack of a better word, sit on a public or a television and insult president or insult ministers, I do not believe that politics should give anybody the right to insult the elderly or people that have offered themselves for public office. You may not agree with their activities or what they are doing, but you would have a way of criticizing it without necessarily using those words that we hear these so-called freedom fighters or truth searchers or whatever they tend to describe themselves with or by use. And so if we do not go down the drain and then stem this tide from the source, this will not be the first time that we are having these things happening. And it will not be the last, unless the National Communications Authority and the National Media Commission or whatever regulators that are there would sit up to ensure that our media spaces are devoid of such vituperatives. Other than that, it will be an eyesore. We would have a generation that do not appreciate the fact that you can have an intellectual discourse disagreeing on national issues or the political side, the other side, without necessarily using insulting words. And so I believe that we should look at that picture, the bigger picture, to see how we can clamp down on these things that we see on our airwaves.
Right. Let's go on the international front very quickly. I'd like to look at these two stories. Protesters call on Tunisian president to resign, and thousands of Tunisians have demonstrated against President Kais Saied as the country faces a deepening political and economic crisis. A crowd gathered in the capital, Tunis, to demand the end of his government. Tunisians who supported Mr. Saied since he came to power in 2021 have grown increasingly frustrated. Why? Because of the state of the economy. The protests come 12 years to the day since former dictator Zine Abidine Ben Ali was forced into exile. And of course, that also has something to do with the Arab Spring and things that came up, the Jade Revolution. It just brings all of this to mind. And in Congo, several people have been killed in a church bomb attack. At least 5 people have been killed and 15 others wounded in a bomb attack during a service at a Protestant church in the eastern DRC. An army spokesman said the attack during the Sunday service in the city of Kasindi on the border with Uganda was likely carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, a Ugandan army group that has pledged allegiance to ISIL or ISIS, an extended part of ISIS. Any quick takes on these international stories? I'm particularly interested in the one in Tunisia.
Well, it's I have been, or we have been expecting something like that to come up, particularly in those regions, because one, we know that I don't want to use the word temperament, but they once they think that the government is out of control in terms of or the economy or the political situation is out of control, they express their displeasure by hitting the streets. And we all know how sometimes it ends. You would have extremists taking advantage, and then it ends up being violent on both sides. And we all know the impact that if there are disturbances in that part of Africa, the impact that it has on those of us on the south or the sub-Saharan part of the continent. And so we hope that the government or the powers that be in Tunisia or even the region would be able to sit down and then have a resolution and a compromise to these things. And to the events in Congo, may the souls of those that perish find peace. And it's gradually, when you start hearing activities of terrorists on the continent, then as a country, as Ghana, we would have to also sit up and make sure that our borders are well protected. Because in the past, you hear issues of civil war on the continent, but if you start hearing activities of terrorists in Burkina Faso, in Sudan, in Somalia, now in Congo, then you want to believe that it's no longer things that are far away from us. They are getting closer to home every day. And so the security apparatus that be in our country must also sit up to make sure that we do not experience some of these unfortunate incidents anytime in our history.
When you look at the back page of the Ghanaian Times newspaper, Hearts dropped points against Samatex. It ended in a barren draw. But today, for example, Bibiani Gold Stars will be locking horns with Kotoko, as well as Accra Lions versus Brekum, Chelsea. But the league log, Ediana on 24 points, Hearts on 21, Kotoko on 20, Bechem as well on 20, and Dreams FC on 19 points. Quite a number of teams on 19 points. Just about 4 of them and another one on 18 points. It is reminiscent of the English Premier League, where if you look at the point differences between the top teams, it's not much to distinguish, basically. But 2 quick stories from the Daily Guide newspaper. Names pop up in Ministerial reshuffle, and the reshuffle that is expected is supposed to turn things around for the government as it takes giant steps to win the 2024 presidential elections after several calls for the president to juggle his ministers and probably bring others on board. Some deep-throat sources, according to the paper, suggest that Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, Minister of Energy, will either take over from Alan Kyerematen as the substantive Minister of Trade and Industry or be shifted to the Health Ministry to take over from Kweku Agyeman-Menu. There's also speculation that Kobina Tahir Hammond, popularly known as KT Hammond, Member of Parliament for Adansi Asokwa, who was initially tipped for that position at the inception of the Akufo-Addo administration before Boakye Ejako torpedoed him, might get the slot at the Energy Ministry. It goes on and on. There's also oil for gold land, and the first consignment of government's oil for gold deal arrived yesterday at the Tema port from Dubai. The Daily Guide has led. The preliminary consignment, which consists of 40 million metric tons of oil, is expected to be increased subsequently. Ghana currently has a monthly oil consumption requirement of 180 million metric tons of oil. So this would be just about 40, 80, so just less than a quarter of our needs, our requirements. But what I find interesting, so this is coming from the United Arab Emirates, we are told. Well, at least that's what we've been told. I am just saying, is it really from the United Arab Emirates? I'm just putting this out there. Only time will tell. Any quick thoughts on that?
I've still not been able to wrap my mind around the reasoning behind the oil for gold. To be frank, maybe I have not read enough on the government position. I mean, gold, the value always increases. Every country, like we've been told, measure their wealth by the gold reserves that they have. And so you have countries, trying to buy as much gold as possible. At a point in Ghana, we had the Bank of Ghana saying that they are now buying the gold to shore up our reserves because the value of gold, it's really high. And we have it. and we are exchanging it for oil, which, is consumed within a day. When you keep the gold over time, the value of the gold would go up. And so as a layman, I'm really yet to buy into that whole idea. And I hope that I hope that it becomes a good decision. I don't know how transparent the whole transaction has become, whether Parliament has been involved in terms of how much the value is going for, who is sending what, whether there are agents involved, whether the price at which it's being sold, who is buying it. Is it a state-to-state transaction, or there are middlemen who are, involved? All those questions, I have not seen them. Maybe the answers have been provided, but I have not seen them. And I hope that it is something that Parliament has looked into and has approved for the benefit of Ghanaians, so that it doesn't become another issue where later facts come out and evidence in support of same point to the fact that it wasn't well thought through and may have had some people benefiting at the blind side of the Ghanaian public.
Well, let's wrap with just a few stories. Republic Press, Mahama attacks Alan Cash. He says it is aimless for these ministers to be stepping down on roles they were assigned to, not forgetting the part they played in driving the country into economic devastation. So he's been, taking a swipe at some of those who have resigned. Kwesindum cries for former employees. NPP floors NDC and Sefiri also election petition, and court remands 2 over 900,000 Ghana cedi robbery. The Ghanaian publisher, NPP, others say no to inclusion of individual bondholders. It's interesting because people have said that, look, when push comes to shove and members of parliament are affected, then they'll come into some sort of agreement. And we have seen quite a number of them together with others also saying that, look, leave our individual bonds out of this. And finally, the custodian newspaper, Greater Accra NDC on fire as Tetechai and Ashimore clash. And this is on the back of the NDC's Greater Accra Regional Chairman, Nia Ashimore, and the Regional Secretary, Theophilus Taitete, who are said to be in acrimonious disagreement with the manner in which the business of the party should be conducted. Any quick take on Mahama's thoughts and maybe the individual bondholders, and we can say goodbye?
Well, obviously the campaigning or quasi-campaigning season has started. It was to be expected that once certain persons further confirmed by their actions or inactions their desire to be the flag bearers of the parties, then they will take aim at each other. But let's see. Sometimes when you hear the NDC communicators, it's as if they have a preferred candidate from the MPP. Sometimes when you hear the MPP communicators, it's as if they have a preferred candidate from the NDC. But at the end of the day, I believe it will be a very good contest. Ghana's democracy is growing, and I hope that this season, this new campaigning season for the highest seat of the land, would usher us into another level of maturity in our democratic dispensation. And definitely the candidate that would be able to sell his ideas and have some form of credibility, either in the past or in the present with Ghanaians, would carry the day.
Well, Bobby, thank you so much once more. We're grateful that you took the time to join us this morning, waking up this early, and we wish you the very best of the day.
Thank you very much, Ben, and I wish you the best of the week too.
Thank you. That is Bobby Banson, a lawyer who just joined us for our news review. But up next, we'll be telling you a lot about sports. And of course, it was glory, glory, Man United. Yes, we did it to the citizens of Manchester. So Manchester is red again, but it was a hard-fought victory there. And I love the way the league is playing out right now. Arsenal on some 47 points, City on 39. It's Newcastle, the Magpies, and Manchester United both on 38, but we have a game in hand over them. And when you look at the league log, 1 point, 2 points, 1.2 points. I just love it when it gets that way because any little slip and you could lose your slot. So which teams will survive and which teams will be knocked out? Which teams will play in the European Champions League? Well, more of that as we bring you Sports Tuesday.